take a recording to my computer and it just completely filled up my hard drive once. So let's see, go to the participants. Welcome everyone to the AERA SIG Science Teaching and Learning Book Chat. Thank you for joining us. We are going to record this session, so if you don't want your face to appear, I know it's a little bit of a Zoom lottery whether you show up in this screen or not, but if you don't want that, please feel free to turn off your camera. My name is Doug Larkin. I'm the program chair and incoming president for the AERA Science Teaching and Learning SIG. We're glad you're all with us today. Before we begin our book chat, I just want to mention our events at the upcoming AERA conference in Philadelphia in a little over 2 weeks. Let's see. So on Friday, April 12th from 5 to 7 p.m., we will be holding a reception at the Science History Institute. We rented out a museum. We're very excited about this. First time we've done this. This is we're spending the money we didn't spend on receptions during COVID. So we hope that you all come. So this is at 315 Chestnut Street in Philadelphia. It's about 10 blocks east toward the Delaware River from the conference. And we welcome all present and potential members to attend. If you say, can I bring so-and-so? The answer is yes, just come. Our SIG business meeting is listed as being late in the afternoon on Sunday. And while not nearly as exciting, it's still open for everyone to attend. Other announcements include our next three book chats of this academic year. Next month, we'll have Alan Feldman, Jawahar Sultan, Katie Lau, and Molly Nation will join us to talk about dialogic collaborative action research in science education. That will be our first international one of these talks. I know one of the authors will be zooming in from Saudi Arabia. Mia Ong from Turk will join us in May to talk about the double bind in physics education. And in June, Daniel Morales-Doyle will chat with us about his book, Transformative Science Education, which I believe is going to be released in the next few weeks. So I know I'm looking forward to all these. And now, it is now my pleasure to introduce, that's the slide with, if you go to the AERA page, you can sign up for all our events and get more information about everything that I just said. Okay, so it's now my pleasure to introduce Antar Tichavakunda. Dr. Tichavakunda received his PhD in urban education policy from the University of Southern California. Currently, he is an assistant professor of race and higher education at the University of California, Santa Barbara. Born and raised in Washington, D.C., Tichavakunda is a product of D.C. public schools and earned a Bachelor of Arts in Education Studies from Brown University. Prior to his doctoral studies, he worked as an 11th grade English teacher in D.C. public schools. And using qualitative inquiry, he is engaged in research on college readiness, Black students' experiences at predominantly white institutions, and more broadly, the sociology of race and higher education. His published work can be found in Urban Education, Educational Policy, Race, Ethnicity, and Education, and many other places. His first book, Black Campus Life, The World's Black Students Make at a Historically White Institution, is published with SUNY Press. Welcome, Dr. Tichavakunda.
Thank you so much for having me. Thanks for inviting me. You know, I'm just happy to be here, and thank you all for engaging and showing up. It means a lot to me. Yeah, so I'll I guess if it's okay, Dr. Larkin, I'll share a little bit about my book and how I arrived at it, some high level things, and then we can get into conversation. Is that cool?
Of course. So the thing about these book chats is we start out with a plan and then we open it up for questions at some point. So we do encourage participation, and that can happen in a couple different ways. If people want to put a question in the chat, either I can read it or I'll ask you if you want to read it. But we'll do a little bit of this halfway, and about halfway through we'll open it up.
Cool.
Okay. So thanks. Yeah, you should be able to share the screen. There we go.
Lovely. Well, yeah, like I said, I won't give you all my spiel, my entire book talk. I'll just tell you a little bit about the book more broadly, and what I did. So I did an ethnography of, well, again, my name is Antar Tichavakunda. My pronouns are he, him. And I study largely Black student life. My research agenda, I would say, if I had to describe it, would be how can we better support and understand Black communities in a society where racism is permanent? So if you know anything about, like, if you've been following this anti-CRT crusade and misinformation around that, you know, CRT is kind of like, what's that, right? They're one of the foremost thinkers of critical race theory, CRT, Derek Bell. Derek Bell was the first Black tenured law professor at Harvard Law School, and he was seen as almost like the godfather of critical race theory. He put forth this hypothesis, well, not a thesis, called racial realism. Racial realism suggests that racism is permanent as opposed to aberrant in society. So that's like a big kind of operating frame that I use. And it's not necessarily a defeatist frame. It's just kind of, all right, let's get real about the structures that are here. Now that we understand the structures, what can we do to challenge, combat, or use them to our advantage, right? So you can see how critical race thought has shaped even how I approach this work. But yeah, I'll just talk a little bit about the nuts and bolts of what I did. And then we can get into discourse. I won't just talk at you all. But the university that I studied is called Westside University. Well, it's a pseudonym that I'm using. Has a very marginal Black student population more broadly. And I looked at engineers in particular. And I followed NSBE, the National Society of Black Engineers. There's a chapter at this school, and I just hung out with them for a year. And in the School of Engineering, it was 2% Black, which is also somebody.
I got it. I got you.
All right, cool. Appreciate it. But yeah, so yeah, it's just 2% Black, which is also important to know. And it's interesting because in the School of Engineering, it was majority non-white students, right? Some people would call it majority minority, right? However, within that, Black students were still very marginal. Now, what did I do for this ethnography? I was in the archives. I'll show you a couple pictures from the archives just because that's not in the book, and I just feel like it's helpful to see. So I went through over 60 years of issues of the university magazine, kind of just seeing what, if anything, was said about the engineering school to learn more about the context and culture around engineering at Westside University. I can't just go in and, like, you know, force these undergraduate students to hang out with me. I had to get permission. So I talked to the e-board at NSBE, the National Society of Black Engineers at this university, and they gave me access. They said, hey, yes, you can totally hang out with us, follow us around, come to these meetings, etc. Just make sure you pay your dues, you know? And I thought they were joking, but they really meant pay my dues. So I became a dues paying member of this NSBE chapter. I conducted a bunch of interviews, 113 interviews total, primarily with 113, primarily with undergraduate students. And one stat that I always like to point out is that I interviewed nearly 80% of the Black undergraduate engineering population at this school at the time. Saying two things here. One, I tried to be as rigorous as possible. And two, it's a problem that with me interviewing probably like 45 undergraduate students, I had interviewed 80% of the Black undergraduate engineering population. So it's also kind of an indictment on the university in that way. I did participant observation, which means I kind of just hung out, became a participant myself, and then I became a NSBE member, and followed them around, shadowed them. I even reached what students called me. Well, I reached what I would say NSBE dad status. It was funny. I was 26 maybe at the time I started this project. And, you know, I had a car, so oftentimes I'd be the one ferrying, shuttling students around because I try to help them out wherever possible. There was an event at a laser tag. They had a retreat at a laser tag place, and I drove a decent amount of students to the laser tag place. And someone, in describing my role to NSBE, someone described me as the NSBE dad or the NSBE granddad, which is very wild considering a lot of these students are 21. But anyway, I say it to say that I was very close to the students. And hopefully that you can trust what I say in this book. Very quickly, and then I'll stop after this, I promise, Dr. Larkin. But I just wanted to show you all, like, kind of stuff I found in the archives, and then we can get to the actual discussion, because you can't see what I saw in the archives, but I do describe it in the book. But you can kind of see like in the engineering school magazine that all the engineers were white and Asian men. So when other scholars talk about engineering culture, STEM culture, having like a boys club mentality, that didn't just appear out of nowhere. It was created, right? So this was actually in the engineering school magazine. Someone said, forget the magazine, sell pinup pictures. This is in 1954 in the engineering school magazine, right? So you have a woman here, and I assume in the 50s, this is probably scantily clad, right? Not really anything to do with education, with engineering or education. It's just, okay, here's this woman that we're looking at, even like oogling at October's oogle or ogle, I'm not sure. But you see kind of this boyish, misogynistic objectification of women in a university engineering school magazine. So if they're lingering, which there are lingering like instances of sexism in engineering spaces, that's because it's, you know, historical in that way, right? I also figured I'd show this too. This is the first reference to Black people in the engineering school magazine, and this is a picture of it. And it says, you know, the scene is dark as Africa, but Africa is lightning. This is the first time I saw Black people in the engineering school magazine. So you can see how Black people were created or rendered in relation to engineering, in relation to advancement, innovation, technology, right? So I just think it's important or helpful to see, yeah, like just kind of the culture that was created, the historical culture around engineering at this school. And in the book, I talk about how some of this culture still pervades. But largely in this book, I try to just examine, I try to be a tour guide, right? I take the reader on a tour of campus life at this university. However, I start this tour differently in that I start the tour in the Black community of this university, right? So I take you across different social worlds or communities within the larger community and tell the reader a little bit about each community or social world that students kind of traverse. There's a Black camp. Obviously, there's way more, and I'll stop after this. But I started in the Black campus community, and then I suggested there's also a Black engineering community at this school. There's also an engineering school community, and then there's the mainstream campus community. And I argue that students traverse these different communities and find belonging and engagement in various ways to various communities, right? So then here I'm just trying to show like, yeah, there's nuance in this idea of belonging, right? One can say that they belong or feel like they belong in an institution for a variety of reasons. And a lot of that is connected to how they're anchoring themselves in a specific community or communities. But I will stop right there. Yeah, but that's just kind of background so we can, yeah, if anyone has any questions or you have any questions, Dr. Larkin, yeah.
Well, yeah, I wonder if you could just say a little bit. This is a group that's, you know, interested in science teaching and learning. I wonder if you can say a little bit about the selection of, you know, you could have studied Black campus life anywhere. Why engineering, and why at a school where they were 2% of the population?
Yeah, no, thank you for the question. So I say engineering in that one of the things I've always been a little curious about as a student, you know, I was like, wait, why are there so many articles? I'm not an engineer myself, right? And that's also important for me to note. But as I read a lot of articles in higher education and just education more broadly, I was like, there's a big focus on engineering, on STEM. What's this about, right? And I learned later that a lot of that is because, oh, NSF is helping fund a lot of this money, right? Helping fund a lot of this research. But, you know, just I see a lot of scholars studying STEM, a lot of scholars I admire studying STEM. And so I, you know, read some of this work. And I knew it was interested in Black students' collective agency and how they flexed their collective agency, the interplay between collective agency and structure. And I wasn't sure how I was going to like kind of bound it. And you know, full transparency, I was just talking to my advisor, and he's like, "Yeah, maybe you should bound it by like discipline, right?" So it's like, okay, well, I'll try engineering. And one of the things I noticed when doing some of this research, a lot of the research focused on STEM and engineering in particular is very outcomes based, right? How can we get more students in and through these majors, right? So are they graduating? Like, what can we do to support them to graduate? That's it. So very outcomes based. And I have like I'm really interested in ethnography, was very interested in ethnography at the time. It's something I wanted to do. So I was like, why can't I be that person to kind of highlight how, these students make it day by day? What's a day in the life of a Black engineering student, right? And I thought in doing this, I could kind of, yeah, just make it feel a little more real, a little more realistic, like to a degree or discipline that's often seen as almost cold and calculating and mechanical, right? I thought it would also just be a useful exercise to show the dynamism in life within this group. So yeah, there's a few reasons why I did that, and also I think the case of a majority minority institution. I think folks often say or suggest like, oh, this is minority serving or majority minority. There's an assumption that Black students in particular will be fine because of, oh, hey, we're all people of color, right? Or we're all BIPOC, right? But as I show in my book, and as like a lot of folks will tell you, there are, there is also antagonism within this broader people of color group. So yeah, I thought it would just be another interesting point to tarry on. So yeah.
Thanks. Jordan, I see your hand. I'm going to hold the mic for just one more minute. So to me, one of the affordances of, I want to go there with what you were just saying about I want to talk about diversity dilution, right?
Yeah.
So one of the affordances of an ethnographic approach is being able to provide rich illustrations of explanatory ideas. And two examples that I just pulled out of the work include the notion of hypervisibility. And I know that from Chris Gilliard's social media handle, where he writes about tech and surveillance and people of color, and diversity dilution. So how did these ideas inform your analysis? Were they something that you entered with or something that came out of this work?
No, that's a good question. I did not answer with that. It's interesting because I talk about my position, who I am, my positionality in relationship to this work, and in so many ways, I felt similar to the students, right? And that I was a Black student at the time. I was a Black student product of I was a Brown University undergrad, historically white, predominantly white. So I thought there'd be more similarities than I thought there'd be more similarities, honestly. But I did want to make sure I wasn't just writing my own story. So I think it was maybe I'm curious to even now when I reflect, I'm like, was I thinking about hypervisibility as a student? I don't know. But when I talk to these students, one thing they often mentioned was like, yeah, if I miss a day, the professor knows. The professor may not know anyone else's name, but they're going to know my name. And that just kind of like emerged from the data. I didn't think that would be something that I would find. I really did want to uplift the importance of NSBE. That was my hunch that NSBE was important. But these other aspects of just, the day to day, like being hyper visible while also invisibilized in some ways, right? The diversity dilution concept, I started to notice it, right? Because we have this whole idea of POC, BIPOC, diversity more broadly, right? And it's interesting. I saw how like different groups were collapsed under the broad banner of diversity, where you literally had like statistics that were saying, Westside University is proud to include a class that is 30%, no, 30 or 40% Latinx, Latinx, Native American, Indigenous, Pacific Islander, and Black, right? All under that 30% banner, right? And I'm like, oh, okay. Like, hold on. Who's within this 30%, right? So I started to see it in numbers, right? And I started to see it in actions as well, where an event that was for everyone, or for, like people of color was not synonymous with Black, right? An event for everyone, more often than not, was an event for the mainstream campus community, which I explain oftentimes means the white campus community, the white cisgendered, cisgendered men campus community. That's really what it meant. And in one of my chapters, I say, is campus life, when I think about the campus community or student life, is the white silent in that, like white student life, right? So I share a little bit in this book. Like I say that, there was a time period when I was like, I don't want to call it Black campus life. I just want to call it campus life. And because it is campus life. I argue that, we can learn more about campus, the campus experience by way of this very niche group. Why not? We're often forced to understand campus by way of other groups, but why not look through the lens of Black students? So yeah, I don't know, but yeah, I hope I kind of
Yeah,
engaged with the question. But yeah,
yeah, thank you. The other thing I wanted to ask you about was the how your work complicates some of the existing paradigm in STEM fields. So my advisor had me read Yuri Treisman's work um, around study groups and some of the things he was finding at the University of Texas with comparing particularly. I think he was looking at students of Black students compared with Asian students compared with white students and the ways those different groups studied and collaborated.
yeah,
And I think reading your work, it was the first time I sort of saw that, like, he may have been bringing a little bit of a deficit lens even to that work. Whereas it was seen at in the early 90s as sort of groundbreaking. How, this strategy that worked for you in high school is not going to work for you in college. Like keeping your
mhm,
head down and blinders on is
yeah.
not the strategy. It might get you through that high school that you're in, but it's not going to get you through college. And yet, like you had some very interesting things to say about peer collaboration and structures that the university provided for group study and peer collaboration. I wonder if you could just talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, no, I appreciate the question. Yeah, and yeah, my advisor told me to check out Treisman's work as well. Yeah, like I said, I arrived at it. I didn't know, but I read it. I was like, whoa, whoa, this doesn't feel right. I imagine it was, written with positive intent, and I don't deny that that's actually what was noticed, right? Like, oh, the Black students tend to study by themselves. But I'm always curious, like, okay, like let's dig deeper here, right? And I think that's also one of the benefits of when you look at like just research on campus cultures or the campus experience. Rarely do we rarely historically is that campus experience seen through a marginalized group, right, or understood through a marginalized group. So I think in trying to do that, I could at least texture or even challenge statements like that, right? Like, oh, Black students need to be more collaborative, right? I mean, I can even say from my experience and probably some of you all's experiences, right? Like, I tried to be collaborative. Like, for me personally, like I tried to be collaborative as a first year student at Brown University. I tried, right? I was struggling in some of my classes, or doing literally the teacher forcing us to be collaborative, doing group projects. And I still remember their names actually, like the two white women I was doing a group project with. Like they were just acting like I wasn't there, even though I was there. Like they would crack inside jokes like I wasn't there, and we would eventually talk a little bit about the work. And when I would see them in the in the streets, they wouldn't say hi. It was only when they were like super drunk when they would say hi. I don't know what that was about, but I remember these instances. I was like, wait, so if I see that this is how I'm being treated in these manners, and from people who aren't Black, why would I continue to do this? So that's one way where I was not expecting the peer kind of collaborative culture. I didn't think that would be something that pops out at all, but just seeing how these Black engineering students dealt with it kind of made me think about it for myself too. So that was something that I was not expecting. But it was fascinating. There was one student in particular, her name's Nina in the book. And she did, I say that she did everything right. She was she would sit in front of class. She was seen as like Miss Caldwell. That's what they called her. They say, "You're so Caldwell," like you're just the epitome of the engineering school, right? Like, so she was very visible. She was very involved in numerous organizations, a Black woman, and she, like she still had difficulty finding groups. That's what she said. Like I said, so how is it, finding groups to work with, like study groups? And she said, yeah, that's something I'm still working on. And she was a junior, so it's like you can do everything right and still not be welcomed. So that's something that I was thinking about. Like, so it's like, even if you're like, what advice do you have that student? Stop being a Black woman. You have other students who were like having very, like, I mean, I think just outright, racist or sexist things happen to them in peer groups, and you have professors who, are not scaffolding how to work together collaboratively in a, collegial, productive manner, right? So I think that was something that was probably the thing that I was the most surprised about, and I was not expecting, honestly. Like I would chat with professors, they're like, "Oh yeah, this field is like inherently collaborative." But where are people taught to collaborate? People are coming to these classrooms with a host of different experiences and maybe bigoted ideologies, right? So how do we teach or scaffold working with people who are not like you, and that work wasn't really done for, I think, in a lot of these spaces and classes. So, and that if there was any finding, I think that would be the biggest finding.
Yeah, so I mean the implications for those of us who work in higher ed and have students coming to us asking, okay, I want to do better in this class, what can I do? It I mean it requires a lot of us to have that intersectional lens to know that we can't just say, oh, well, go and do, have study groups or connect with friends, right? Because knowing, and I think of both Nina's story and Jasmine's story about the ID, right? Like the microaggressions that happen on a regular basis as part of efforts to collaborate are more than a barrier, right? They're almost a deterrent
Yes.
to the type of collaboration. I mean, we joke in our doc program that everything after high school is a group project, right? Like that, like it just it life is a group project, and so developing those, it's not just developing those skills, it's navigating like dangerous waters sometimes,
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
so I think that puts an onus on us to have that intersectional lens to understand, okay, you're coming from this particular position, I better take into account what I know is going to be difficult for you, and or create structures that, and I think at the end of your book you talk in terms of funding, right? Like what
Yeah.
sorts of things do we fund and what types of, are we are we paying the leaders of NISB, to run this group because we're having them do all this invisible labor for the university,
Yeah.
right? There's that whole piece of it too. But
Yeah.
I just saw that as a really important piece, the collaboration piece, because it does seem like this, Swiss Army knife tool that, okay, just collaborate, and
Yes.
not as easy as saying that.
Yeah. Yeah. Folks like faculty thinking, I mean, I'm guilty of this too, right? Like where I'm like, all right, y'all, working groups, right? Like I'm gonna do something different. I'm progressive. Let's work in groups. But no, it's not I love that you said Swiss Army knife, right? It's not that, there needs to be scaffolding to the working in groups. And like I said, I hope someone else, other folks really pick up these peer group, collaborative, what happens in labs. I really hope people take that up because I think that's one area at least where we can see change. I think immediately. If so, I really hope other folks are engaging with that. So yeah.
Well, I don't want to keep you all to myself, and I know Jordan's been waiting patiently, and I want to just open it up to others as well. If you have a question, Jordan's he's leading the pack there with the hand raising thing, and if you have a question, you can either raise your hand or put it in the chat. Jordan, you're welcome to just unmute and ask your question. Welcome.
Well, to be fair, someone did just put in the chat a question. So if we can, I could wait and not be tired by waiting. So
No,
if we,
you're here, Jordan. Let's go. It's nice to
all right,
see you.
Put
bro,
your best foot
what up,
forward. You got it.
well, first of all, good evening, everyone. Jordan, him, his pronouns. Just a quick little introduction before my question. So I'm a gay, disabled, Black, cis man. I'm a computational data scientist at MIT, and I'm working on like archival research around like an initiative to reduce the racial wealth gap in Boston. So this is very informative and relevant from a data collection side. And then I know Antar. He's my special from college days, and we also did Teach for America together. And so I'm glad that the direction got to intersectionality because I was curious about what opportunities or challenges your research presented as it relates to considering diversity from like different intersecting marginalized lenses, whether that be like sexuality, religion, ability status. I'll just admit, like I'm an alpha man. I have a service dog, and like people act like I have a disability because of how I present, which is very like a normative, but I work very hard on it. And so I'm curious if like if any of your I want to call them characters, Nina, like the people in that you write about, do anyone have like any certain intersecting marginalized experiences that really stood out to you? And then last point to, because I don't know when I'm going to get talking to you, the question about that Douglas Larkin was bringing up was like, well, what is the onus of like a professor who is charged with like you getting paid to create space to do the work, to know what those intersecting lenses are, to know how to even go about answering that. Sorry, that was a lot.
And number one, thank you for the question. Number two, thank you for being here. Always nice to see you, brother. Yeah, thank you for your work. So I will be, again, I'm big on being honest, right? When I wrote this book, I submitted it, I wrote it to SUNY Press, and I sent it to my editor, and the editor sent it out to a few reviewers. And it's interesting. You write a book, and I mean, my editor's like, it's going to take work. You're going to have to revise, da 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 da. I'm like, yeah, sure, I know, but like, I wrote this dissertation. It's okay, trust me. And then like, she looks at the first chapter, and then like all the comments. So I'm like, oh, this is going to take a lot of work, So just the process of writing the book was very helpful for me in my thinking, and useful and humbling. And I think I learned a lot about myself and scholarship. But I will say this, as far as like, my book went out to reviewers the first time, my first submission. I'll say one thing that both the readers said generously, right? They were like, and for lack of, to be quick, they were like, hey, Antar, intersectionality is a thing. Hey, there's this concept called intersectionality, right? Like you're a critical race theorist. You're aware of Kimberly Crenshaw. Hold on. Gender matters, right? As do other identities, right? So that was, where I really had to lean on. I was like, I have to really get into my gender studies bag and like learn more of this, because the readers were looking at this like, hey, on page 66, on page 50, on page 43, these are all interactions that are, yes, raced, but also gender really matters too, right? And so they had to, so I give, shouts out. I mean, if you write something, I don't think it's ever in isolation, right? So I'm thankful for my readers who were like, hey, you need to talk about intersectionality and gender here, So I had to be pushed on that, right? And it's so easy, and I say this to say it's easy to just do this work with a single axis of identity lens. I'm very much focused on race, right? But it's a better, more realistic, and I think more rigorous piece, because I was pushed to think about gender. In particular, gender came, so that's me thinking about intersectionality more broadly. And obviously, intersectionality is much more than racism and sexism. It's also these other identity-based structural oppressions. But to engage with what you said, I did not see, I saw how class came to fore in some ways, in that a lot of the students who were doing really, really well academically were from higher socioeconomic statuses, right? There were some students who, working class, first generation, who did not attend a school that was very well resourced, who were struggling more academically, right? So I saw it show up there. I saw class show up there in an interesting way. I saw ethnicity matter in different ways. You had a lot of West African students who, and I kind of touch on it a little bit in the book, not too much, but just kind of diversity within Blackness, think about ethnicity. And I think gender, the interesting thing about that, and I'll say this, I was typing as you were talking, was that I think some of the students, when you're taking so many engineering classes, I'm sure a lot of you all know, taking a lot of STEM classes, you have an engineering major, your time is this is something I just didn't know. Your time is just focused on engineering, When you're taking those elective classes, for a lot of these students, it's like, okay, what's going to demand the least amount of time, Or even the number of electives you're even able to take. So I am curious about if students across gender in engineering, to what extent they have the tools conceptual tools and language to identify how sexism is happening, how racism is happening, how gendered racism is happening, you know? So I think that's one of the things that I have another paper about this, about general education and kind of access to general education. But I do think there'd be more, I would have more from students about the role, because I straight up asked them, like, very clumsily, how does gender matter, right? It's a clumsy interview question. If any of y'all as students, don't ask a question just like that. That wasn't, you know, you want to ask it in a way where it engages, like, you know, more seamlessly. But a lot of students didn't necessarily have language for that. You know, this is not to say they're like, you know, they're not smart or not thinking, but that was just a tough thing for them to think about. But I did see how it came up, right? And in labor, right? While I was there, Black women led NSBE. A Black woman restarted the NSBE chapter at the school, right? So I think about the gendered work that was there that a lot of students kind of didn't, and I didn't really think about at first, right? Thinking about sexuality, there was a group called Quest. So I think it was like queer undergraduate engineers, science and technology. I'm not sure, but that's the only time I saw sexuality come up. But again, that wasn't something I was really exploring. But yeah, that's something I think, you know, we have to continue to think about and work with. So yeah, thank you for the question, Jordan.
Thanks. That leads really nicely into our next question.
Yeah.
Zubeida, would you like to unmute and ask your question, or I can read it if you prefer?
Okay, thank you, Antar. This is very interesting work. I was curious about the distinctions within the, you just discussed intersectionality, so this like goes right into it. The gender, the different experiences that the women or, you know, male, female students and other genders exhibited something visible that they express that you care to talk about, because we know that the literature warns us about these the female experience in engineering schools. So I was curious about specific examples that you care to share. Thank
Yeah,
you.
no, thank you so much for the question. And yeah, like I said, I was hoping for like the overt, you know, and I think that I maybe kind of highlight some ways where gender really came to fore. I think if some students, some women identified students in my sample in the participant pool even said like, yeah, when I'm here, like at this school, I think race comes to fore, basically. Not because they're always, you know, thinking about the women that I was studying, right? They're always Black women, and no time are they not. But some of the students like explicitly said, yes, but race seems to matter more when I'm here, right? Or in that setting. I will say also when one of the things I'm thinking about, like you know, you're probably aware of a SWE, right? The Society of Women in Engineering. And I was started to ask students, I was like, wait, so why didn't you go to SWE, like the women? And the common sentiment, as one student, a woman said, she said, yeah, SWE kind of feels like a white sorority, you know? So even here we see how the organization that's for women in engineering is in some ways like it is not a place where Black women and other women of color feel like they belong. So here race is also coming to the forefront. I'll also say if there was a big thing that I noticed between like men and women in particular in my study, it was that like the people who shared the most, in my opinion, like egregious, frustrating, like you know, racist, sexist comments, it all came from women. Like I saw, I think that was in, you know, thinking about peer collaboration. It seemed like the women, Black women, had to deal with more of like the, you know, just kind of like just the microaggressions, the explicit insults as well. So I think that the women deal with that more in a very in-your-face way than the men, than the men in my sample. So I think that's one way, like like the interpersonal peer collaborating, like the stuff that a lot of the students who identified as women share with me, those it was not the same for the men that I studied. Like they might not have felt like they belonged, but they weren't being disrespected or insulted explicitly like the women were. So I think that's that was probably like the big one of the big kind of differences I saw. You're muted.
Thank you for the answer. Did these conversations come up in the meetings or separately when you were having interviews with them?
Oh, in interviews, yeah. So one of the things that I say, and I think Dr. Meseret Hailu does this work in different ways, thinking about women, Black immigrant women in engineering as well. And she talks about how, I think one of her papers as like, it's called like, it doesn't make the difference. And she's talking about gender, how for some of these women, like gender doesn't, yes, gender matters, but they're kind of muting it in some ways. And I mentioned that because there's one student in particular I'm thinking of, a biomedical engineer, Black woman, and she was, she was mentioning how she doesn't want to be seen for her race or her gender, right? So you also have students like that who are like, I don't want you to even, notice my identity in that way, right? I am a scientist first and foremost. But yeah, so that's kind of, I hope I kind of engaged with the question.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks. There was a quick follow-up about that, about you showed the percentage of Black engineering students in the school. How many of those Black engineering students were women? Like,
there were more women than men that I interviewed. I'll double check. Sorry, I don't have that offhand.
That's okay.
Yeah.
Olayinka, would you like to unmute and ask your question?
Hi, I was interested in hearing about how NSBE sort of functioned as, I guess, a counter space. Like, how did it aid, like, the students' participation in NSBE, like, help them with persistence, if at all?
No, that's a great question, and thank you for the question. She was an administrator, and obviously I say more about this in the book. Administrator, and she led this program called this institutionally supported office, the Center for Diversity and Engineering. So she was the leader, Black woman, and she said to me, if NSBE wasn't around, we probably would only have like 1 or 2 Black students. It was something like that. It was striking, right? If it wasn't for NSBE, we would not have Black students here, right? So I think that very much speaks to the centrality of NSBE. NSBE students even played a role in the recruitment, which again is where I started thinking about labor. Like, hold on now, like they're doing recruitment. They're talking on how many panels, right? So NSBE students were intentional about showing up to panels that were for incoming students. They were pushed to go to some of these panels as well, while also sometimes out of their own volition. They were, it was truly a counter space. Like, a lot of the students got jobs, internships and jobs directly through NSBE. This isn't to say they couldn't get jobs through other channels, but, they would use NSBE through, I think the regional conventions, national conventions to get jobs. They use it as a platform that way, as a meaningful belonging. Like in my book, I talk about there was a party that NSBE would hold. They called it Brown Sugar. And they had brown sugar because that was the name of the drink. So full of brown sugar and God knows what else. I was not going to have it, right? I'm already like 26 at an undergrad party. I'm not going to drink, right? I mean, I'm here. I'm an ethnographer. That's it, But one of the reasons they had that party was because they wanted to subsidize the costs for going to the NSBE convention. So all the money they raised for that would go to subsidizing the costs for convention, so these students could be in this space with all these other Black engineers and potentially get jobs, right? So you think about how pivotal it is in that role. Like, NSBE is literally playing a financial role. This chapter is playing a financial role for these students. These are all undergrads. But one thing I'll also say about brown sugar is that, and me speaking with more of the students, like the participation from NSBE was great, the membership. And and talking with some of the students, some of them, I remember one student said like, yeah, this is the only party I go to during the year. Like, I mean, that's pretty significant, right? Like, when you think about the undergraduate experience, at least from the media, my experience, I'm thinking parties matter, and for students who have all this work and, these deadlines and very strict requirements, for the only parties you go to be NSBE parties, that really means something, in my opinion, right? So I think about the retention, like how do you write that on a survey, right? I feel like I belong. Like, as NSBE does those things that like are sometimes more difficult to quantify, but matter so much, right? So in that way, I think NSBE plays a critical role as a counter space, a place of belonging. Some students didn't even, I remember one student in particular, I forgot her name. I think in the book, her name is Jasmine. But I mean, she would always be studying during NSBE meetings. Like, so she's here in meetings doing like some type of code, right? She's a computer science major. And I eventually asked her, I was like, yo, like, why do you come to meetings? This is me as an interviewer. Sometimes I get a little, not combative, but I challenge. I'm like, wait, so why do you come to meetings? Like, you're here doing homework. Why don't you just go to a library, right? And she was like, yeah, I mean, I don't know. Like, this is the one place where I feel like I belong, where I can exhale. I don't feel, she said, in computer science, in her major, I feel like I don't belong. Like, so in all those classes, I'm aware of my identity. I feel out of place, but here I can just be, So I think about that, you can't quantify that, right? That space needs to be created. And, she can't, even though she's not even really participating, she's there present just to be there, right? Like that's it enough. That's giving her that motivation or that refilling her cup so she can go back out there. So yes, completely, NSBE is a counter space, like a completely, yeah.
Yeah, thanks for that. You had a little, again, a nuanced finding from the ethnography. You had a point in there about how all the counter spaces that were created didn't function equally, that some places that were counter spaces didn't actually work that way. Can you just say a little bit about that?
What was I
I think
referring
it was
to?
at the Multicultural Center.
Yes. Yeah, thank you. So like, again, and I'm just thinking about kind of like diversity dilution. Who's the space for, right? You would think that a multicultural center is for everyone, everyone. Like, let's all come together, like rainbows, butterflies, all that. Captain America, let our powers combine, right? But that doesn't happen. So sometimes we have like, these intra-group conflicts, like within the broad banner of people of color, right? So I remember there was one space, the Center for Diversity and Engineering. Again, it's for all these minoritized groups. However, as some students said, like, it was only Latinx students who were in that space for the most part. If I saw Black students, and I spent some time observing there as well, if I saw Black students, they were kind of in and out. I'm here to print and that's it. And it wasn't like, the Latinx and Black students were beefing. That wasn't it. It was just that was the space for the Latinx. Well, that's how Latinx students found belonging in that space, right? I'm not going to say that they colonized that space or anything, but I think about, yes, the nuances there. So so I think if I were writing this from a perspective where I'm centering the Latinx engineers or SHEP, that particular organization, it'd be a different story. So that may be a counter space for them, but not necessarily a counter space for Black students. And just because it's not a counter space for Black students, that doesn't mean that it's a violent or unwelcoming space. That's just not, that just isn't how it ended up. So yeah, again, like we do have to think about the complexity and nuances and dynamism within these spaces and who matters. So yeah, thank you.
Thanks. Jordan, you're at the front of the line again. Go for it.
Oh man, I love asking questions. This is great, man. I got so many. But I guess one, I'll just say I appreciate the spaces created for you to like speak Black, and I mean that in the terms of viewing Black as a culture and understanding that sometimes things might be perceived as not IRB approvable because, well, never mind, we won't go down there. So I really appreciate that, and I also really want to just thank you for the racial realism or just the whole framework because it really helps me view the question I'm about to ask differently. So I'm really excited about your take. But I'm like, so if you have this framework that like it's not gonna go away and that's like not the end goal anymore, I'm like, oh, that's fun now because what does restorative justice look like if you're acknowledging that this is not a problem you're working to cease to end, but rather to like now like narrow the gap. Like, how do you reframe, like, you know, like if Nesby's a counter narrative, well, like how do you restore that, I guess?
That's a great question, and I'll say this, right. And as always, thank you for your insights. I'll say this. One of the things about racial realism that isn't in my description of it, or that I don't always include or mention, is the fact that it's like a 4-part thesis, right? Of racial realism is. And part of that thesis that, yes, racism is permanent, right? And again, you can disagree. People totally should disagree. I think if there's anything that, folks find, that we should push back on about critical race theory, it is, it's the racial realism bit, because that's tough. Racism isn't going anywhere. But it's not stated, and I know you're not saying this. I'm saying Derek Bell isn't stating this like it's like we cannot. He isn't stating this to say let's give up, right? He's saying let's understand what's going on, right? And part of racial realism is understanding, yes, racism is permanent, and we need to reframe what success looks like. So success isn't necessarily attached to an outcome; it's attached to a stance, a posture, struggle. Derek Bell says, as one of the points of racial realism, he says that we must learn to find salvation in struggle. So part of the acceptance that racism is permanent, that the racial realism thesis is also an acceptance of finding contentment in struggling against racism as well. So it's this interesting kind of duality there. So the work of restorative justice is still valuable, important work. It's just understanding what it is, right? It's like I was talking with my students recently, and I was like, this is not a perfect example, but it's like, okay, we know we live in a climate that is like rainy and cold, right? You may change the climate in some way. I don't know how. Like, you can, I don't know, tilt the earth in a way. I don't know. You can do something like that, or you can, come in with an umbrella and a coat, and move differently. I don't know. It's not a perfect example, but I think it's, yeah. Anyway, thank you, Jordan. I appreciate it.
Thanks. Maria, welcome.
Hi, I'm Mia Ong. I've
Yeah.
really enjoyed this hour and everyone's questions and your answers. I wanted to get your thoughts on rising anti-DEI stuff with your take on how important, how central and essential for persistence that these NSBE can be as a counter space, not just that, as also as a, financial support. And it seemed to have served multiple roles in supporting these students. I think there are lots of ways you can read the writing on the wall with this legislation, but it does seem that some of these groups, or many of these groups, are under threat. And there's a lot of overcorrection happening at universities anyway. So I wanted to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, thank you for the question. And I need to work on a better answer for this. I'll say that. One of the things I am thinking about, though, again, we're seeing too much overcorrection from university leadership. I do hope that university leadership just becomes more courageous at this point. And I think I'll also state that, I was just in a Zoom earlier with one of my buddies' classes at University of Arkansas, right? And they've completely done away with DEI, right? So they're really thinking about this on the ground right now. And one of the things I say, yes, I'm in California, but Arkansas's problem is also my problem, because it can the whatever framing they use for that can also be used here. That's in my opinion. Like I think anyway. So I'll say this. I think one of the things I'm curious about is how NSBE. One, I think one of the things I highlight in my book is the work, the labor of students, faculty, staff, admin alike to create a welcoming space for students with marginalized identities, right? Black students, in like a NSBE, if I think about NSBE in particular, NSBE was restarted by one Black woman, right? She was doing a lot of this work, skipped class a few times just to get it established on campus. So I think about that labor that goes into that, and this idea of I talk about in the book, Dawson, they're political scientists, the idea of linked fate, the idea that, and I think other communities as well have this, similar ideology, the idea that what's good for the community in general will be good for the individual Black person. So we have I think that a lot of universities, maybe not explicitly, but implicitly, are exploiting the labor of students with marginalized identities already. Like, this is without the anti-DEI stuff. We know that, all right, Black students are going to retain themselves, right? That's it. They're going to find a way, right? And I think about, my brother Jordan, right? We are both members of the first Black Greek letter organization. It started as a study group because, they were tired of seeing Black people being pushed out of Cornell University. So what did they do? They took the time to, become Masons or join Masons and turn a study group into a nationwide fraternity. Yes, it's beautiful, but yes, that's work on top of being a student. So I'm thinking about students right now in this anti-DEI space. I really think it's going to be even more labor on students who are really passionate about this work, really passionate about, and I think about this often as well. And I may get some heat for this, but I think, when you're thinking about like a, four-year institution, someone coming in at 18 years old, 17 years old, right? Understanding that folks can come in a lot of different ages. But, at that age, everything feels so urgent, and I think, so even cognitively, right? We know the brain isn't fully developed till 24. Where am I going with this? I often tell my students when I was advising for a Black Student Union, I tell them, hey, y'all, your work you're doing is critical, and you are students first, and I don't want them to compromise their status as students doing this work that they know is larger than themselves, right? And it feels even larger, I think, at that age, and maybe I'm becoming too old giving that advice, but I don't know. I think the sense of duty, the sense of obligation will propel a lot of these counter spaces. However, I think that's going to fall even more so on the backs of students, staff, administrators, and faculty who are sympathetic to this cause. And I'm curious about how other organizations like NSBE chapters in cities or states, how they're going to show up. I'm curious about in Arkansas, how NSBE chapters in Arkansas are going to support these chapters themselves, right? Maybe that's what we need. And I'm also curious about like organizations like AERA. How are we going to be able to support these groups themselves, right? How are we going to support them monetarily or just by showing up? But I think, this work, this labor is going to have to be outsourced. How can we create? I was talking with one of my colleagues, and she was mentioning, we think about a lot of these Panhellenic organizations, these historically white fraternities and sororities, and they almost exist outside of the university structure. They're within it, but outside of it, right? What would it look like for us to create something similar, but around DEI? I don't know.
There's your next project, maybe, your next book. Thank you very much.
I appreciate it. Thank you for the question.
Thanks. Well, I wanted to just at least acknowledge, because we haven't really talked about it yet, but gosh, this book is really well written. And I saw what you were doing a couple chapters in, like you had this nice 4x4 grid of like, okay, I'm going to talk about one of these social worlds, and I'm going to talk about each like interaction with the other ones. And I have this case study. And then comes chapter 8, like this bowling ball through your carefully constructed, 4x4 grid about informal relationships.
Yeah.
And it doesn't have to be a huge question, but like since you collected this data, we've had a global pandemic. I'm sure you've heard. And sustaining informal relationships has become particularly challenging in educational and professional settings. And I'll add, I was thinking about what's going to happen to these students in the work world. Like there's replication of these same structures, like out in these firms that they're getting internships and jobs at. But just generally, how have you thought about this, the findings from that chapter, the informal relationships piece, from a 2024 lens?
Yeah.
Of the importance of sustaining them, and like how we even do that in the era that we're in right now.
Thank you so much for that question. I'm apologizing, and thank you for your words about my writing. I appreciate that. And I'm apologizing in advance because I do not have a great answer. Well, my answer is honestly, if I wrote this book right now, I mean, like it would be a very different book, not just because I'm a different scholar, because of the time. One of the things I noted when I talk to the students and like administrators at other universities, one of the things they're saying is like, we don't know where students are. And I'm just so curious about how COVID has shaped how we think about space. Like, is it all digital space? And I mean, I'm like I said, call me old school, but I think something is lost when we are just thinking about the digital, right? And I think digital is there's a lot within the digital, but there's something missing. And this isn't me saying we all need to go back to work in person, right? But I am curious about what is lost, especially for students, you know? And I do think, especially for like marginalized students, right? There's something special about being able to come together in a brick and mortar space, even if it's, you know, on a set of steps just for an hour. There's something that's special there. And I'll say, at least at UC Santa Barbara, you know, there's like a almost an initiative to get some of these informal spaces back. You know, like there's an intentionality there to do that. So I'm curious about that. I do think it'll be a different book, because I do think you know, with COVID, remote work, remote learning, online learning, and also just thinking about you know, supposed so-called racial reckoning, right? Where people are at least a little bit more attuned to race and identity. I'm curious. This book would be completely different if I wrote it now, completely. But I do think the peer work is critical. You know, how we navigate these things is critical. And I'm still trying to figure it out. As someone who's teaching undergraduate students now, I'm like, there's a very clear shift with 2020. So I'm trying to figure it out. Maybe that's another book, right? What does campus life look like? You know, on the heels of us taking the COVID pandemic seriously. But yeah, I know it's not a sufficient answer, but that's where I'm at. So.
Well, I want to respect everybody's time. And you know, these engineering students, I just wanted them to sleep.
Yeah, me too.
Like get some sleep,
too.
much better. But I want to respect everybody's time. I really want to thank Antar for coming here today. This was fantastic. We do our little applause here.
Thank you all so much.
I'm going to stop the recording now. I may hang out for a couple minutes, and thank you, everybody. Feel free to head on out. This is a great chat. Thanks so much. Stop cloud recording.